Kia ora everybody, welcome to another Vernon CMS webinar. Today we're going to be talking about reporting. So we're going to cover the basics of what the reporting feature does and the different options available. I'm going to run a report using a template. We'll edit that template and we'll create a brand new one. We'll also show you how to add totals and breaks to your report. And we'll talk about standard report templates and create one of those. We'll also spend a bit of time on word merge reports. Depending on what version you're on, your reporting might look a little different, but it will have the same functionality. So let's get started. The first thing that we're going to do is create a report. So today we're going to focus on creating reports of object records. So you can either get the list of objects first through List Manager or Search, or you can do this when you're in the reporting window. So I'm going to do a report on vases. And so the first thing I'll do is open up Object Identification. And then I'm going to do a search for vase in the search bar at the top of the screen here. I'm going to select all of these 14 records here and click OK. So it's brought up that browse list of 14 vases. And now I'm going to click on the report button in the toolbar, and this will open the reporting window. So the reporting window has 4 main tabs on the left here. We have report template, where you can choose a report template. We have being able to edit that template, select your records, and run your report. So within report template, this is organized into recent templates, so ones that you last used. We have standard templates, and those will be specific to your organization, and your favorite template, so perhaps you've favorited some there. Today, I'm going to choose an existing template, this listing down the page image with short catalog. I've already selected my records. You can see them there, 14 vases. So I'm immediately just going to run that report. We have different options for output here. You can output it directly to the screen. You can output it to file, which would be a PDF, or you can send it directly to the printer. And I'm going to choose screen. So you can see the progress bar here of Vernon gathering that information and putting it into this report for me. So here's my report. It's as easy as that. And I'm just going to close that report. So we'll take a closer look at the tabs here. So under report template, as I mentioned, you can choose a template from these tabs here, but you can also access more templates in portfolio, or you can create a brand new template. Within edit report template, this is where you specify how your report is going to look, what format it's in. You can choose which fields, out of all the many fields you could report on, which fields you're going to put in your report and how it's sorted. This is also where you save a template. Within record selection, you can select your records, as I said, either through List Manager or Search, and as we've just seen, being able to run a report. So with this report template that I've just used, I've decided that I actually want to change some things about it. I want to put some different fields in there and some slightly different formatting. So I've already chosen it here. And so if I go into Edit Report Template, you can see the name of the template there at the top of the screen. And if I look into this report settings area, this is where I can choose the report type, and I'll go into a bit more detail about those soon. And I'm quite happy with having a listing report and the orientation, but I do want to make some changes to the format. So I'll go into formatting options. And we have the page settings tab and the layout tab. So I want to change the font. So I'll click on this A here, and that will bring up the options for me to be able to choose a different font. I'll choose Verdana. I want the font to be quite large, so I'm going to change it to size 12, and I'd like to change the color to navy. Just click OK there. We also have down here the header and footer options. So within the footer, I'd like to include a page number. So I can click this little icon here. We also have options for date and time, and file name. So I'm just going to put that page number in there. Click OK. And now I'd like to change some of my fields. So I'll click on this plus button for select fields. And I've decided that I'd like to include system ID in my list of fields. So we have the available fields here and the display fields here. And I can either double click on that, or I can use this arrow button. So I'll use that arrow button. It's put it at the bottom, and I'd like it to be second place. So I'll just drag and drop it up there. I'd also like to include the valuation field. So if I do a search up here for valuation, because as you can see, this is a very long list, and I click find, it will find any field that has valuation in it. And I can just keep clicking find until I find the one that I want. So I'm going to click that, and I'll double click it, and it'll put it over on this side. And I'll just drag that to the bottom there. There's a field that I want to remove, which is taxonomic classification. So I'll click on that, and I'll click this arrow here to remove it. And click OK. So I've done my changes to the look and feel and which fields I'm going to report on, and I'd like to have a look at it and just check that that's what I want. So I'll go back to run report, and I'll output that to screen. So this message comes up when you've already run a report recently on these same records. Most of the time you can just choose last selection. It's telling me that I chose them on this date and at this time. But if you're in a large organization, maybe in the time that you were changing your template, somebody made some changes to your records. That's when you might want to reselect them. But in this case, I'm just going to choose last selection. See the progress bars, it's generating my report. Nice large font in navy. You can see the system ID there. We can see the value. So it's made those changes to the template that I had. You can just change a template once, just do a one-off, create a PDF, send it to somebody or print it off for somebody who needs it, and not save the changes if you want. But in this case, I actually do want to permanently save the changes on this report. So I'm going to go back into Edit Report Template, and I'm going to click Save Template. Portfolio will open, and you can see it's already selected that same template name, and I can just click OK, and it saves that for me. But sometimes you don't want to use an existing template, or you want to create your own one-off report for a really specific purpose, or create a new template that you want everyone to use in future. So what you do is you go to Report Template and click this button here, Create New Template. And that's going to take me into the Edit Report Template tab. And here it says Create a New Report. So there's no field selected, and just the default settings are there, which we can change if we wish. In the list of the report types, listing report will create PDFs. Export will create Excel or CSV files for you. Word merge will take that data, it'll do a mail merge and output it into Word. And then you can use your Word skills to format that in there. And Paul's going to talk about this soon. And there's XML import, which is essentially being able to share your data with other applications. So I'm going to do another listing report. Within the orientation, we have two options. We've got group down the page, which was the type that we already saw, and field across the page. So the group down the page report basically takes all your data about a particular record or object, puts it into the report, and then the next part down on that report, it'll do the next object. So it's grouping them together. Whereas the field across the page report is much more like a table format, where you've got column headers for each of your fields and all the data showing in much more of a table format, and you can't have images in this report orientation. So I'm going to go into formatting options. And depending on whether you've chosen down the page or across the page, you'll see different options in here. If I'd chosen across the page, you wouldn't see this information about images here. So I'm going to decide on the font, and I'm going to use Calibri, size 11. In my header, I'm going to put the name of my organization. I'm going to say that that's Vernon Museum, and I want that centered. And then within the footer, I'm going to put today's date. And again, I want that centered. With images, if I tick this, these options become available. Primary only, if that's ticked, that's going to show the first image in your record. So that's the one that shows as a thumbnail for your object record. We've got these different size options here. So original will go back to the original source file. And depending on how you've done your images, that can be different for every object. You could have some much larger ones and much smaller ones. Thumbnail is the default for Vernon to show a small thumbnail of your images. Derivative is where we've got an option to choose our size, and all of the images will be that same size, but they won't necessarily be the small size. So if we click into derivative and click into this field and click this options button, the little down arrow, it'll bring up this list of size options, everything from tiny to X large. Medium is quite a good size. It's a nice large image without overwhelming your report. So that's what I'm going to choose there is medium. If we look in the layout tab, we've got this section called column proportions, and we can change by dragging and dropping the different proportions of each of the columns in this report. And I think I want to have my image a little bit larger there. Within the separators area, there's all these options for different kinds of separators, so solid, dash, and so on for group, row, and field. And then we have some more options here in terms of formatting. So there are a lot of options for you to explore. I'm going to choose to have an extra blank line between my data, and then I'm going to click OK. So now we've decided on how it looks. And now we want to decide what we're actually going to report on out of all of the information that's available to us. So I'll click on Select Records. In here, I want to choose from the list of available fields, System ID, accession number, accession date. I'm just double clicking on those, name and title, and object type. And then I'll click OK. Now I can choose how I want it to be sorted, and I'm going to choose the accession number. And by default, that's going to put it in ascending order, but I can change that by clicking on it and clicking on this sort direction button here, and that will change it to descending. So I'll put it on ascending and click OK. So I think I'm quite happy with what I've set up there, but I just want to check how it looks to be sure. So again, I'll go to Run Report, and I will choose Output to Screen. Choose my last selection. And here we have my report. You can see my header up there, my fonts that I've chosen, the image size, and down the bottom we'll see the date in the footer. And if I wanted to make some changes here, like I wanted the font to be smaller or larger, I can go back and do that. But I think I'm pretty happy with this, and so I'm going to close that. And I'm going to save this template. So I want other people in the future to be able to use this. If I wanted, I could just run this report to PDF and close out of here and not save it, but I do actually want people to use this in future. So I'm going to go into Edit Report Template and then click on Save Template. So I'm saving my new template. So it opens up Portfolio. So what you want to do is find the right folder for this to belong in. And I'm going to give it a name of Listing, down the page, Object Review. So I want people to be able to use this for any type of object in future. And so then I click OK. So I can choose some different records to show here, just as an example. It doesn't just have to work with the selection that I chose. So I'll click Clear Selection, and it's going to say Whole File because I haven't actually chosen any records yet. And when you see that it says Whole File, that means that if you ran this report, it would report on every single record in that file. So it might be every single object in your collection. And if you've got thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of objects, it's going to take a while for that report to be produced. You may want to do that, but just be sure if you want to do that. I don't want to report on every object, so I'm going to choose some records through List Manager. I'm going to go to File, Open Saved List. And from my portfolio, I'm going to choose this list of 20th century objects. I can see there's 72 records in that list and click OK. And see them all there. Click OK again. Now you can see I've got my selected records, 72. So I'm going to run that report again and choose Screen. And you can see these messages down here. It means that it's getting the right size of those images. It's processing to get the right size of those from the originals. And here we can see I've used the same template. We've got Vernon Museum at the top, but we've got different data in it. So we've got all these amazing 20th century objects in this list with the object type, the title, accession number, all of that information that I chose for them. So I'll click Close there. And that's a really basic overview on all of the main things that you can do with reporting.
Now I'm going to build upon some of those basic concepts and show you some of the further options that are available within reporting. So reporting can be used for a variety of different purposes. So one of the key ones is to get data out of the system. That might be to generate a report for an internal acquisitions committee. It might be to generate a list of basic object information in response to a public inquiry. Reporting can also be used to reformat the information. So that can be as complex as producing a custom label, which is then physically attached to individual objects within your collection. And then lastly, it can also be used to summarize the information. And that's the example I'm going to look at first. So Vernon provides options for doing things like totals and averages. And I'm going to go through an example of providing totals, in this case on one of the number fields, the latest valuation of a set of objects. Existing reports or new reports can take any set of records as their starting point. So I've got a set of objects that I've already selected, and I might want to now create a list of their total valuations. So I can take my 69 records and I can start making a new report. In my case, I'm just going to create a report from scratch so that you can see all of the elements that go into making such a report. The statistical options are only available when the columns are set to go across the page. So I'm going to change that so that the fields are across the page. And I'm going to choose a few basic fields to include in that. I'm going to put in my department. I'll put in my title, and then I also want the latest valuation. In my case, I'll do the latest internal valuation that the museum has done. If we want to make use of those options for statistics, they're held at the options for the individual fields. So I'll highlight that valuation field, and then I can go to details on the right to go to those further settings. And so in this case, I want to do totals on valuations. So let's choose the total option and then say OK. Now at that point, I'm already ready to run that report. I may want the records to be in a certain order. And so in this case, I've got a whole lot from different departments. So let's sort them by department order as well. So I'll click on Sort Fields and we'll choose Department as my one sort field. And so by default, that's just going from A to Z. I can now run that report on the 69 records that I already had selected. And I'll just send that to the screen. And so we can see the values of each of those items, and we can see that they're broken down into various different departments that that group of objects fell into. If I go to the last page, we'll see that we've now got that summary information, a grand total of the values of all of those objects. What we can also do is break that particular report at points where we want subtotals. In this particular report, we can see that they fall into different departments. So breaking this by department so that we get subtotals for each of those seemed like an obvious choice. So I can do that by going back to the Edit Report template page. And again, that's one of the options down at the field level. So I've got 3 selected fields, and I can go back and see what those fields were. If I want to introduce subtotals by department, that's the field that I need to break the report on. So I'll highlight department, and I'll again go back to the detail page. So let's switch on, break on department. That also gives me a whole lot of other optional settings that I can introduce, and I'll just pick a couple of those as an example. So let's add some over and underlines on the total to make those totals stand out a little bit more. And then let's have a little subheading. I'll just say subtotal every time there's a break in the report. Now, the key thing for having a break on the report is that you must be sorting on that field. If we weren't sorting on that, then every time it gets to a different department, which might be every record or two, it will have another subtotal. In my case, we know that I've already sorted the report on the department, so I'm ready to go. And I'll again do a preview of that to the screen, just keeping the same sort order that we had before. And now at this point, we've introduced our subtotal text and a subtotal at the end of each section for each of those different departments. So that was a quick example of how we can introduce totals and how we can then break those totals into subtotals on a particular field. So normally those breakpoints would be authority control fields. So one of the fields where you've got standardized terms, where you know that many of the records will fall into the same category. Now, because reports are things you might have to do regularly, it becomes useful to then save those as templates. Those templates can then be reused on any selection of records. So on a different day, you can pick a different group of records and use the same settings that you've already built up and saved on a previous occasion. So I'll do a search for some other records. Let's look for some of our bird specimens. And I'll just pick a couple of those. Again, if I want to now produce a report, I can just click on the reporting button in the top toolbar. But in my case, rather than starting from scratch with a new report, I can make use of an existing template. Vernon includes a concept called standard reports. And these are reports that have been flagged by your organisation as ones that are of use to many different people. So they may be the most frequently used, and they could be used by the entire curatorial team, for example. So here we can see that I currently have 2 different standard reports for my organisation. One of those is the image with short catalogue, and that's the one that I'm wanting to run for these 2 bird specimens that I've selected. And so to run that, I just need to select it and then go to Run Report, and I'm ready to go. So again, I'll just preview that to the screen, and I'll have my 2 bird specimens with some basic field data and the images beside them. So in a large organisation, over time, you may build up many standard reports that help with common processes that you're involved in. So the standard reports, we saw that we just have 2 at the moment. If you're a system supervisor, then from that first page, you'll see an option for standard report setup. And that's how you can add more report templates into that list that everybody in your organization can see. So I'll click in there, and it's just a case of adding more rows onto there. The options button just goes to the portfolio tool, and then I can pick any other additional reports that have been saved and make those standard reports so that other people have shortcuts to them. So in my case, I'm going to pick that word merge image grid as one more example of a standard report. And I've added that in. So now I could go back and do the same process. So find some records, and I'll now have that new report as one of my options. I'm going to search for Rodney Fumpston, who's an Auckland artist, and find all of the works that I have in the collection that are by him. So I'll pick half a dozen of those, and then we'll go back to reporting. And so now when I go to standard reports, we can see we've got 3 reports, one of which is the one that I just enabled as being a new one that's a shortcut for everybody in the system. And once again, I can then easily run that just by sending it to the screen. In that particular example, it's integrating with Word using the Word mail merge format. So there's an existing template in Word so that it knows for the information in Vernon, how is it going to lay that out within a Word document. So then the last topic that we'll have a look at is seeing how those word merge reports are set up. And I'll go through a very basic example. So let's in this case find some of the crownland pottery vases that we have. And those of you who have visited our office will know that these are physically on display around the different shelves in our office. We have a collection at the moment of around 50 different vases. So I'm going to select a group of those and again start doing a report on those. In this case, I'm going to start one from scratch. So rather than using a template that's already there, I'll show you how we can make a new word merge report with some basic options. So I can use the Create New Template button at the bottom of the first page. Word merge reports are great when you need to do something beyond what the basic options in Vernon support. So that might be positioning the fields in a very particular place within the layout of the page. It might be including graphics like an organization logo. It could be changing the formatting of the text using some of the more complex options that Word will provide you. So on the first page, I'll choose Word Merge as the type of report that I'm doing. Like the other formats, I can then choose the particular fields that I want to include. And I'll just pick a few. Let's have the title and maybe the primary maker. Perhaps the production date and the accession number. And that would be enough to make a quick, simple label. Now, because this is a brand new Word report, the system doesn't yet know how we want to present that within Word. And so when I try to run this, instead of seeing the finished result, it will create a new template where I can start working out all of that layout and formatting. So let's click on screen. It'll open Word for me and it'll give me a message to say, well, you're working on a report template. You can save that once you're done. So those are the fields we've included. So a couple of examples of things that we could do here that we couldn't do directly in Vernon's reporting are that we can add fields so they're positioned on the same line or on different parts of the page. So let's say we want the maker's name and the date on the same line. We might change the formatting of an individual field. So let's say that we want just the title to be in italics. And we can add simple graphics that might include things like a dividing line between the records. We can make use of words header and footer. So I could click down to the bottom of the page where the footer is, and I might have a simple copyright statement, for example. It might be copyright my museum, and I might also want the museum logo. So I have all of the features available within Word to do these things. So let's just insert a logo and make that part of the footer that's on every page. I'll just get that to float above the text. And then we just size that to whatever we want and position it somewhere that makes sense. So that's probably the basics now that I need for my report. I could now preview how it looks, and I can do that through the View menu, and I can go to Macros. So we need to do that through Macros because Vernon has some extra code that supports things like embedding images, changing the formatting of some of the data that's coming out of Vernon as well. And so if I go to Macros, Vernon has automatically added in the various different code add-ons, and one of them is the Vernon Systems Limited Produce Report macro. So that takes the data we selected in Vernon and combines it with our template. And so I've run that, and there we are. We've got our finished result. We've got the maker and the date on one line. We've got some formatting there, and we've got our footer at the bottom. If we were wanting to reuse that again in the future, there are two different things we need to save for that. So we had our template here, which set the overall layout. So we need to save that so that Vernon can use it again in the future. So I could just save that. And we need to save it as a template. And we can give it whatever name we want. Let's just call it label. And then back in Vernon, we need to save the report in Vernon. So nothing's yet saved back in Vernon. So let's swap back there now. And we can go back and edit the report template so that it knows where we saved that layout in Microsoft Word. So under Edit Report Template, we can go to the formatting options. By default, it's set to create a new Word report, but now we can make use of our existing layout because we've saved that. Under Document File Name, I can select the macro-enabled template that I created. And there it is. And then lastly, I can save that so that all of those settings are held in Vernon and are available to people in the future. So we can save this as, we can use any name we want, but we have a convention in our demo system of describing what format it is with some further notes. We can call that a basic label. And so at that point, I now have a complete working template that I could use for different records in the future. So if I wanted instead to do a report of Pauline Thompson, who's another Auckland artist, I can choose the 3 different paintings that we have by her. And then in the reporting screen, I can now rerun that report that I did. So there's the report, word merge basic label. And when I run the report, it no longer has to ask me how I want to format that template because that's already been created and it's already been linked into the saved report that we've made. So when I click on screen, it'll now do that whole process end to end. It'll open up the right template and then it'll apply all of the layout that's based within that. So that's one example of using a word merge template. Now they're very powerful and they can be used for things as complex as loan agreements, for example. where you've got whole blocks of permanent text, like terms and conditions, and specific logos and data from Vernon, all getting combined together. Thank you all for joining us. It's great to see such a big group of you all today, and we'll see you all again soon.